Populism is not a threat to democracy. Populism is democracy.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Speechless. I'm your host, Kev Phares, 23-year-old conservative activist, host of Speechless, the radio show, but I also bring you all this content no matter where you're watching from, whether that's Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, all of that stuff. So make sure that to not miss a minute of anything I talk about here, that you guys like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment what you think. Let me know in the comments. What are you thinking about anything that I'm talking about here? Always comment, and share this with your friends. We got a few different things. This was kind of a last-minute stream. We were supposed to have a debate night with Breakaway USA, but that had hit some difficulties. But I was still free, and so I thought, hey, we can still have a debate night, but let's react to one debate that's going absolutely viral. It's this one that you might have noticed that I brought on screen right at the beginning. You might have even seen it come up a few different times through your Twitter feed, through YouTube, anything like that, because it incorporates the former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, but also somebody, while you might not recognize his face, his voice directly, anything like that, you might have heard of him before. A famous banjo player dismantles Nancy Pelosi in a brutal debate over populism and democracy. In fact, that famous banjo player is formerly from the band Mumford & Sons. He was the banjoist for them. His name is Winston Marshall, and he delivered a brutal takedown of Nancy Pelosi, the Democrat from California, and her argument claiming that populism was a, quote, threat to democracy. That's what Nancy had to say, is that it was a threat to democracy, saying that the true threat to democracy was an elite ruling class that looked down on instead of working for regular people. Pelosi spoke at Oxford Union in late April, arguing that populism was synonymous with ethno-nationalism and isolationism, and so-called populists took advantage of the people once they reached positions of power. She went on to say that some Americans, quote, poor souls who are looking for some answers were reluctant to accept the answers Democrats provided because their views on guns, gays, and God distorted their population. That's the craziest part. She claims that people aren't necessarily open to Democrat policies because they care too much about guns, they have some view on the gays, and they like God too much. That's what Nancy Pelosi would say. And so instead of going further and further into just this article that describes all this, I think it'd be important for us to actually react to what Winston Marshall had to say and his full Oxford Union speech from the debate that he had with Nancy Pelosi. But before we even do that, I want to ensure that we also discuss something very important, which is before we talk about populism, before we discuss populism, we should define populism. And so take a look just real quick so that we can have the Oxford, because this is an Oxford debate, we're going to take the Oxford Dictionary definition of populism, which is a political approach that strives to appeal to ordinary people who feel that their concerns are disregarded by established elite groups. So of course, Nancy Pelosi would see this as a threat to democracy. Why? Because she is a part of the established elite group that disregards ordinary people. She would see it as a threat to democracy. In reality, she sees it as a threat to herself. And I haven't watched this whole speech yet, but I'm very excited to listen to what Winston Marshall had to say to Nancy Pelosi. Let's react to this together.
I now look to Mr. Winston Marshall to close the case for the opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, words have a tendency to change meaning. When I was a boy, woman meant someone who didn't have a cock. Populism has become a word used synonymously with racist. We've heard ethno-nationalist, with bigot, with hillbilly, redneck, with deplorables. Elites use it to show their contempt for ordinary people. This is a recent change. Not long ago, Barack Obama, while still president at the North America's Leaders Summit in June 2016, he took umbrage with the notion that Trump be called a populist. How could Trump be called a populist? He doesn't care about working people. If anything, Obama argued he was the populist. If anything, Obama argued Bernie was the populist. It was Bernie who'd spent 5 decades fighting for working people. But Trump. Something curious happens. If you watch Obama's speeches after that point, more and more recently, he uses the word populist interchangeably with strongman, with authoritarian. The word changes meaning. It becomes a negative, a pejorative, a slur. To me, populism is not a dirty word. Since the 2008 crash, and specifically the $1 trillion Wall Street bailout, we are in the populist age. And for good reason. The elites have failed. Let me address some common fallacies, some of which have been made tonight. If the motion was that demagoguery was a threat to democracy, I would be on that side of the House. If the motion was that political violence was a threat to democracy, I'd be on that side of the House. January 6th has been mentioned. A dark day for America indeed. And I'm sure Congresswoman Pelosi will agree that the entire month of June 2020, when the federal courthouse in Portland, Oregon was under siege and under insurrection by radical progressives, those too were dark days for America.
Ooh, gosh, Pelosi would never even want to talk about that. What an amazing, the summer of love. Remember that? Every conservative pundit has come out and said that is like, yeah, maybe January 6th wasn't so great. We have questions, we want answers, whatever. Wasn't so great. But what about the fact that Democrats encouraged the political violence that happened in our cities and resulted in autonomous zones in several major cities? Huh? Are we not going to call that a threat to democracy? He's going through and making a clear argument that some of the things that Pelosi would bring up when it comes to populism, this is actually genius. What she would bring up is like, oh, well, Trump is a threat to Trump is a threat to democracy, and because he claims to be a populist, that means populism is a threat to democracy. Well, that's a false equivalency. Correlation is not equal to causation. What he says before this other part of like the progressives and that being a dark day for America, he also says the demagoguery. So what Pelosi would see as many people on the populist side having demagoguery for Trump, she would see that as a threat to democracy. Very much could be. But that still is not in and of itself populism. Populism is not populism is an idea, it's an ideology. And that in and of itself is not necessarily a threat to democracy, not directly, especially when it serves to serve the people. That's the purpose of populism, is that it serves the population, your average Joe. And so, no, it's not going to be a threat to democracy because, if anything, the whole point of America when it started was, in a sense, based in populism.
Yeah. Yes?
There is no equivalence there. So, that, yes.
So you don't agree?
So, oh my gosh. So Pelosi speaks out and she says there is no equivalence there. But it is not like what happened on January 6th when there was an insurrection incited by the president of the United States. She says there's no equivalence between what happened in the summer of love with Chaz and Chop and all that BS. There's no equivalence? Interesting.
And it's fine. You don't agree. That's fine.
But it is not like what happened on January 6th, which was an insurrection incited by the president of the United States.
So you don't agree? But you'll condemn those days. My point, though, is that all political movements are susceptible to violence and indeed insurrection. And if we were arguing that fascism was a threat to democracy, I'd be on that side of the House. Indeed, the current populist age is a movement against fascism. I've got quite a lot to get through. Populism, as you know, is the politics of the ordinary people against an elite. Populism is not a threat to democracy. Populism is democracy.
Absolutely.
And why else have universal suffrage if not to keep elites in check? Ladies and gentlemen, given the success of Trump, and more recently Javier Milei taking a chainsaw to the state behemoth of Argentina's bureaucratic monster, you'd be mistaken for thinking this was a right-wing populist age. But that would be ignoring Occupy Wall Street. That would be ignoring Jeremy Corbyn's for the many, not the few. That would be ignoring Bernie against the billionaires, RFK Jr. against Big Pharma, and more recently, George Galloway against his better judgment. Now,
well, and even another one that he didn't bring up, and maybe it just wasn't as timely, but it's happening literally as we speak, is Wall Street Bets roaring kitty and going with GameStop and AMC back in 2021 and now reviving again. Maybe that's something we talk about after this reaction, but let's keep going.
all of them, including Galloway, recognize genuine concerns of ordinary people being otherwise ignored by the establishment. I'm actually rather surprised that our esteemed opposition, Congressman Pelosi, is on that side of the motion. I thought the left was supposed to be anti-elite. I thought the left was supposed to be anti-establishment. Today, particularly in America, the globalist left have become the establishment. I suppose for Ms. Pelosi to have taken this side of the motion, she'd be arguing herself out of a job. But it's here in Britain where right and left populists united for the supreme act of democracy, Brexit. Polls have showed the number one reason people voted for Brexit was sovereignty, for more democracy. Thank you. What was the response of the Brussels elite? They did everything in their power to undermine the democratic will of the British people, and the Westminster elite were just as disgraceful. As we've heard, David Cameron called the voters fruitcakes, loonies, and closet racists. The Liberal Democrats did everything they could to overturn a democratic vote. Keir Starmer campaigned for a second referendum. Elites would have had us voting and voting and voting until we voted their way. Indeed, that's what happened in Ireland and in Denmark.
Yep.
Let's look at some of the other populist movements. The Hong Konger populist revolt is literally called the pro-democracy movement. The farmer revolts from Netherlands to Germany, France, Greece to Sri Lanka. Farmers are taking their tractors to the road to protest ESG policy that's floated down to us from those all-knowing, infallible elites of Davos. The trucker movement in Canada became anti-elitist when petty tyrant Prime Minister Justin Trudeau froze their bank accounts, not the behavior of a democratic head of state. The Gilets jaunes in France, ULEZ in London, working people protesting policy that hurt them. And how are they treated? They're called conspiracy theorists. They're called far right by the mayor as well. Ladies and gentlemen, populism is the voice of the voiceless.
I'm not sure if this is what he's going to get into, but he's making an absolutely stellar case, not only for populism, but also why people fight against populism, why it's being called a far-right movement, why it gets called fascism or racism or bigotry. It gets called that because the elites tell us, the elites that populism seeks to replace, the elites that populism seeks to expose, for their self-serving behavior, that's who it's threatening. And so then they will spin the narrative through government-controlled media, or even sometimes out of their own wicked mouths, through their sharp tongues. They spin webs of lies that treat it as though if you support the idea of individual freedom, the idea that the average Joe should have as much, if not more, power than those in charge of them, then yeah, they're going to call you bigoted. They're going to call you fascist. They're going to call you evil. When in reality, they're the ones that are that. Joining me to keep this reaction going is my good friend and host of other Breakaway podcasts as well, Fabian Garcia. Fabian? Oh my God, I just called you Garcia. Fabian.
That is my name.
That is your last name? I always think
Yeah.
Lux because that's like what you are on
What is up,
Fabian
Kevin?
Garcia. I've
Kevin's been killing it on Twitter lately.
Thank you very
Holy
much.
smokes.
Thank you. Well, I am right now. We are reacting to, I don't know if you saw this video, and we're about halfway through it right now. This is the former banjo player from Mumford and Sons destroying Nancy Pelosi on the topic of the debate was populism destroys democracy. That's what Nancy Pelosi argued, and he is arguing against that. And so we're gonna keep going with this. There's just about 5 more minutes left in this.
All right.
The real threat to democracy is from the elites. Now, don't get me wrong. We need elites. If President Biden has shown us anything, we need someone to run the countries. When the president has severe dementia, it's not just America that crumbles, the whole world burns. But let's examine the elites. European corporations spend over 1 billion euros a year lobbying Brussels. US corporations spend over $2 billion a year lobbying in DC. 2/3 of Congress receive funding from pharmaceutical companies. Pfizer alone spent $11 million in 2021. They made over $10 billion in profit. No wonder then that 66% of Americans think the economy is rigged against them for the rich and the powerful. And by the way, we used to have a word for when big business and big government were in cahoots. And I think any students here of early 20th century Italian history know what I'm talking about. What about big tech? Throughout the pandemic, Biden's team, the FBI, and the Department of Homeland Security colluded with big tech in censoring dissenting voices, not kooky conspiracy theorists. People like Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, the Stanford epidemiologist. People like Harvard scientist Martin Kulldorff. People spreading true information, not misinformation, true information at odds with the government narrative. Need I remind you, democracy without free speech is not democracy. This was a direct breach, by the way, of the First Amendment. Before COVID, intelligence services colluded with big tech to have Trump suspended off Twitter. Yes, the same platform which hosted the Taliban and Ayatollah deaf to Israel Khomeini, they thought the president crossed the line when he tweeted on Jan 6th, quote, "Remain peaceful, no violence, respect the law and our great men and women in blue." That's a quote. You may be thinking now that Trump is a populist. You are right. He didn't accept the 2020 elections, and he should have. So should Hillary in 2016, so should Brussels, and so should Westminster in 2016, and so too should Congresswoman Pelosi, instead of saying the 2016 election was, quote, hijacked.
And this is exactly the thing. And Fabian, I'm curious your thoughts on this, because these are the kinds of things I have been saying since 2020 is like, yeah, sure. I guess Trump, at least based on the verifiable statistics that we currently have, he lost that election. But then why did we also spend millions and millions of dollars for the Mueller report just to find that Hillary Clinton knowingly lied with help from Obama and other Democrat elites in saying that Russia hijacked the 2016 election?
So I came in a little late. Is this like Oxford or something, or do you?
Yeah, so this is an Oxford debate in
Okay.
which Nancy Pelosi had made the original claim at a speech back in 26 or back in early April, I believe it was, where she had made the claim that populism is a threat to democracy, to which they set up a formal debate to discuss this. Nancy Pelosi presented her side. I didn't play that part. I kind of summarized it. She basically said populists she basically said that all the time populism always descends into the leaders abuse their power and they're bigots and they're racists and they're terrible people and they cause insurrections. Like basically she just argued that Trump is representative of all populists and it's not actual Trump. Her view of Trump is representative of all populists.
And you got all that from her after all the Botox and filler. You can actually make that out. I'm surprised anyone can understand what she says anymore. Yeah, when I look at that lady, I just know that anything she says, anything that comes out of her mouth, I'm going to believe the opposite. I'm going to think the opposite because she's making these drastic claims, and I know the Democrats keep saying this has been like their tagline because I guess they think it's working. They said we need to preserve democracy. We need to save democracy, and in their eyes, anything that's not what their narrative is telling you is preserving democracy, is I guess wanting fascism or authoritarianism. So they're trying to divide the people who love America against the people who actually love America, or maybe the people who love America don't really love America, but they're I'm a little confused. What's their version of democracy, and why is it considered a democracy? No one's questioning that on the left. They're just going along with it. Meanwhile, they're putting up Palestinian flags and they're saying death to America, and they're joining all these leftist organizations. And the elite are saying it's to preserve democracy. Like, oh, really? Like all this is to preserve democracy? It just makes no cognitive sense whatsoever.
Well, and that's exactly why I tend to bring up the entire idea that whenever the left is like, "Oh my gosh, we are threatening democracy by overturning Roe v. Wade," or things like that. And that's another one where when it comes to Roe v. Wade, I'm like, actually overturning that restores democracy. Like here's the thing is that what originally the idea was democracy exists and the Democrats want to associate themselves with it, and that's why they call themselves Democrats, and that's why it goes all the way back to Thomas Jefferson, who is basically the founder of the Democrat Party, and so it was his idea of democracy. That's what founds the Democrat Party. It makes sense because back then that while America wasn't perfect, it still had a pretty regimented definition of what democracy was. And then as we moved throughout time, no longer is it Democrats represent democracy, it's Democrats define democracy. That's what it's become. It's no longer that they stick to the value of what democracy actually is. It's that democracy is whatever they say it is because their name is the one that sounds the most like it.
Well, and also just to add on to your point, the entire point of leftism and progressivism is that you have to keep progressing because there is no singular point where you can say, I'm a progressive and the world is now perfect. Everything is perfect, because that will never come, because you can divide people in an infinitesimal way and you'll never get to happiness. So when they keep progressing, they're moving in a Hegelian dialectical materialism, a spiral, which is what literally Hegel says. At one point, we will become gods. And then that's the point where humans will be all perfect and all happy. So progressivism is progressing to this place that they can't even define or won't define, because if you define a place, somebody could pick holes out and say, well, how is that going to work? But in their mind, it's this mental gymnastics that they play where they say, no, we have to keep going. Okay, Roe v. Wade. Okay, now men, women. Oh, okay. Well, now pedophiles can be with kids, but it's okay because that's their own lived experience. I just came back from the Space Expo today, and I sat inside the wrong speaker hall. I thought I was listening to something else, and the title of, and Kevin, I'm sure you've dealt with this because you were just in college with the DEI stuff. I got out of the corporate world 13 years ago, so I've never dealt with this, and this, just listening to this, really pissed me off. I know it has nothing to do with what you're talking about.
It's okay.
But I want to read the title. It says, panel, inclusive orbits, nurturing diversity for a sustainable space tech future. inclusive orbits.
Let's
And
talk. Here's what I want to do. That'll be the teaser. I want to get into everything with your space expo that you had and the diversity in space. And I want to get to the question you asked, if it got answered, all that stuff, because I know a little bit about that. We're going to get, and I want to talk about that. Let's finish up this video, finish up our conversation on populism, and then we'll hear everything that you had to do with your diversity space expo today. All right, let's see what else. The Mumford and Sons band. That's the other thing that's just fascinating about this. This is the Mumford and Sons banjo player, former Mumford and Sons banjo player. Yep.
Wow. All right.
Quote, hijacked.
That's Nancy Pelosi in the background, still claiming that the 2016 election was hijacked. Just so you know.
Wait. She's actually there?
Yeah, she's right there.
Oh my gosh. I didn't know this. Okay.
Democracy.
Oh crap! I accidentally went way too far back, but I want to make sure. Yeah, quote hijacked. Here we go.
Quote, hijacked.
And she's like right over here. It was. Thank you. Let's see. There she is.
Means that we don't accept the results of it.
What about the mainstream media? Let me read you some mainstream media headlines. The New Yorker, the day before the 2016 election. The case against democracy.
Oh, he got her.
The Washington Post, the day after the election. The problem with our government is democracy. The LA Times, June 2017. The British election is a reminder of the perils of too much democracy. Vox, June 2017. The two eminent political scientists say the problem with democracy is voters. New York Times, June 2017. The problem with participatory democracy is the participants. Mainstream media elites are part of a class who don't just disdain populism, they disdain the people. If the Democrats had put half their energy into delivering for the people, Trump wouldn't even have a chance in 2024. He shouldn't have a chance. You've had power for 4 years. From the fabricated Steele dossier to trying to take him off the ballot in both Maine and Colorado, the Democrats are the anti-Democrat party. All we need now is the Republicans to come out as the pro-monarchist party. Ladies and gentlemen, populism is not a threat to democracy, but I'll tell you what is. It's elites ordering social media to censor political opponents. It's police shutting down dissenters, be it anti-monarchists in this country or gender-critical voices here, or last week in Brussels, the National Conservative movement. I'll tell you what is a threat to democracy. It's Brussels, DC, Westminster, the mainstream media, big tech, big pharma, corporate collusion, and the Davos cronies. The threat to democracy comes from those who write off ordinary people as deplorable. The threat to democracy comes from those who smear working people as racists. The threat to democracy comes from those who write off working people as populists. And I'll say one last thing. This populist age can be brought to an end at the snap of a finger. All that needs to be done is for elites to start listening to, respecting, and, God forbid, working for ordinary people. Thank you.
I will say one of the funniest things to me is that his answer is, if you want the populist movement to come to an end, actually become populist. That's basically what he says, because he says start working for the people, which is the entire idea of populism in and of itself is, hey, if you work for us, we're not going to complain or be mad or anything like that. But that was the former banjo player of Mumford and Sons, was in Winston Marshall. And he destroyed Nancy Pelosi absolutely in 13 minutes. For 13 minutes, he fucked her good. So
Yeah, because her husband's not.
well, that's because he
has hookers coming home.
He's allegedly doing things with men with hammers.
Yeah. Well, it's okay. So I had no idea that she was actually there at
Mhm.
Oxford receiving these rebuttals.
Because they actually were debating, like, they were going back and forth during this.
Oh, I missed a good part then.
Uh-huh.
You know, this is something that I've always admired about British Parliament is the way that they interact with each other, and it's just a give and take. Also, Canadian Parliament, you know, but now they have a lot of rules apparently. Like
Mhm.
you can't call Trudeau, I don't know, whatever, they pull the air out. Anyway, that's one thing that I've always admired about British Parliament is like you actually have to have chops and go in there. You can't read this pre-rehearsed. Or you can read a pre-rehearsed message, but then you have to sit there and answer all these questions. And the Senate chamber is a lot different, and the congressional chamber in the House is a lot different. I think we need more of that.
Absolutely. I think we do need a lot more of that to some extent. The thing I really just liked about this whole thing is that we have somebody that came from the entertainment industry again, and he actually split up with Mumford and Sons because of issues,
Wow.
because of political differences. But we have somebody who came from the entertainment industry actually articulating one of the best arguments I have ever heard for a populist for a populist opinion. But the thing is that populism has become synonymous in America with conservatism. Now, the thing is that you can have left-wing populism. You can have a leftist populism, and that's generally where you get people that are pure communists, not communists like your pink-haired dummies on a Columbia campus or anything like that. No, like a Che Guevara communist. And I'm not saying I agree with him. I tend to agree with those communists on the idea of like that the elites are the problem, but that's about as much as we'll ever agree on. But I do think that it's great to have somebody, or it's great to understand and see how the right wing, the conservatives, have become synonymous with populism. Because everybody on the left that currently holds power is a part of that elitist uniparty.
Yeah, as a person whose family comes from Cuba, Fidel Castro, when he came to power, he was very, very like Che Guevara.
Hmm.
Obviously, for the people against the elites and all this. But I don't know if he was really, I can't tell if he was a useful idiot for, Russia and communism, or if he actually thought he was going to do well, or if he was just screwing over his people for power. So, it's really interesting because everything's changed so much. You have these ideologies that they seem so simple back then, even though they were not. They were brand new. They were on the cutting edge of what is possible. How should society be organized? And now we've gone from Fidel Castro communism to whatever in the hell we have now, which is postmodernism mixed with, Hegelian dialectical materialism mixed with communism and neo-Marxism and cultural Marxism. It's like everything is so convoluted that's why people are so confused. They don't know what's up, what's down, but the elites want them like that because if you're all confused, there's no cohesion amongst yourselves. And if you're all confused, you have to look at the cult leaders, the elite, and say, what is the world? And they're like, this is what a woman is. This is what a man is. Not anymore. A man is a woman. And that's why Ketanji Brown Jackson said when they asked her, Senator Marsha Blackburn, what is a woman? She said, I don't know. I'm not a biologist. And that right there told me if they can manipulate someone who is going for the highest position in the land to make the hardest decisions ever and get her to even say, I don't know what a woman is, even though I've been a woman all my damn life and I don't have a penis, then we're in a really bad position.
Absolutely. I think the one other thing that I will say that I find fascinating is the fact that Nancy Pelosi took the position that populism is bad for democracy. The reason why I find it fascinating that she would take that position, because it's not that she came out and said conservatism is bad for democracy. She didn't come out and say that Trumpianism is bad for democracy. She didn't come out and say being a Republican is bad for democracy. She said populism. And the entire idea of populism, definitively, is that you are acting for the people. And as I mentioned, populism is not exclusive to conservatism, to the right wing.
No,
We-
it's not. It's
many Democrats even, sorry, I was thinking my thought through, is many Democrats even claim in some way to be populist, that they're working for the people. Isn't that the entire idea of our government? Isn't that the entire idea of America, is that you're supposed to be working for the people, that the average person can have a voice? It's not meant to be. And it makes me honestly a little sad that it's become synonymous with the right wing, because we as a country, we can disagree on whether or not what we put our taxes to, where we put our money towards, and everything like that, and if we're going to get into a war, why we should get into a war. We can disagree on all those things, but at a minimum, we should agree that our government should work for us. But we obviously have people in government that believe that them working for us is a threat to democracy.
I had a really deep thought in Miami that I wrote down, and it's exactly about this. I was thinking about the biggest usurpation of power that I can think of that has ever existed. And what I came up with was, I might be able to read a little bit of what I wrote. I have it somewhere here, but basically it was how the representatives of the people were able to take the power from the people whose they were just supposed to report what was happening. So for instance, obviously we didn't create democracy. The French didn't create the idea of democracy. It goes back, as far as we know, to the Greeks. And when you had a small society, you can give your opinion on things that were happening around town, around in your small city. Once it got so big, obviously you had to do stuff like produce for the state, so you can spend all your day at court or whatever they called it back then and just resolve problems. So they started sending representatives, say, hey, go tell me what they said. And then that slowly became to, hey, go vote go vote for what for what I like. And then somehow the people whose job it was to do the job for the people took all the power. And now the people are left without the power, and the representatives have somehow convoluted that entire dynamic to make it so that we don't have a voice. Like, how in the hell did that happen? It's actually remarkable.
It's because we allowed it to happen, because the problem that a lot of people see is that we hear nowadays, people are like, oh, well, and people talked about it in 2020, especially. They were like, well, I want to vote for Joe Biden because, like, I feel like with Trump, I always have to pay attention to politics. Like they'll say things like that. Like they want to be able to put politics into autopilot and not have to worry about it. And I understand that in the current society, in the society we live in, how you come to that conclusion. But the problem is that our society, if you want to live in a democracy, if you want to live in a society where you can vote, where you have an option on decisions, then you can't put politics into autopilot. That's not how our system was designed. Our system was designed for you to pay attention and be researched and to know what is on the ballot, not just who, but what is on the ballot. When you're voting for somebody, what does that actually mean? Our system was designed that way. If you wanted to put yourself into autopilot when it comes to politics, then go to some place that has a fascist dictatorship or to some extent a monarchy, because that is a place you can put yourself into autopilot. You're going to have a lot more rules, and you're not going to be able to live necessarily the way you want to, but that's how you can put yourself into autopilot, because somebody's going to be making all the decisions for you.
Yeah. I think to add on to that, the easeability of being able to live life is conducive to not caring about politics. Resolving problems is hard. Figuring out how to balance your own budget at home, most people can't even do. So if you can't balance your budget at home, then how are you going to worry about the budget of your country or your county or your state or your city if you can't figure out the budget of your household? So that's obviously a kind of an esoteric meaning, but let's get more specific and talk about something like social media. Do I want to be looking at what all these bozos in Congress are talking about, which half I don't agree with, and the other half I don't really trust, but kind of agree with because they're all getting paid off by the same people? Or do I want to just focus on my Instagram scrolling? Because that I can control. I can control when I do it, how long I do it, what I like, and what I don't like. This is about me. And I don't want to spend all this time worrying about what everyone else is doing. It's a lot of work. So I think the easier our life is, then the less we pay attention to politics. Something quickly I want to read.
Yeah. Go for
because so kind of going along with my last thought, I was researching when the first time, and I didn't know this, when the first time the United States had a voted for representatives. And I personally think that was a big misstep that the US did.
Mhm.
We can get into that all later, but anyway, so I researched this, and apparently it was at the House of Burgesses in 1619, which constituted the first democratically elected legislative body in the British American colonies. This is in
Interesting.
1619.
Yeah.
And in 1258, a guy named Simon de Montfort established representative democracy, a representative government, by convening a famous parliament that curtailed the king's unlimited authority in England. So 1258, Britain established a representative government. 1619, the first time we elected a legislative body in the British American colonies. I would love to go back into those days and say, hey guys, like maybe put some more rules in it.
Maybe that's really fascinating. And the sad thing is now we come to a point in our world where I even wonder whether or not we actually live in a democracy anymore, because we have a significant, those who do vote, which is still less than, usually at best 50% of the country. um how many of them are actually learned enough on the issues
Yeah.
to make an informed decision, and where are they getting their media from? Because the thing is like you could vote Democrat. I firmly believe that there are people out there that could be well researched, be exposed to all the sides, and still vote Democrat. I do, because the Democrats have an emotional appeal to somebody who makes decisions very emotionally, could fall into that belief system. But the problem is that when you have a swingable number of people not knowing that the Hunter Biden laptop exists, when you have that, then you don't have a learned voting populace. You don't
You
have
know,
like
something comes to mind as you were saying that. And the Democrats need, and I'm going to use this term, but I don't mean it in the way that I'm going to say the Democrats need weak people to stay in power. And what I mean by weak is someone who's just not established, right? They want all these illegal immigrants to come in. They want all this stuff to happen so that they can look for them to power because they feel like they don't have any power.
mhm,
They're going to give power to all these people. Now, Democrats can't survive when you have strong individual citizens. That's why, the conservatives, I'm not going to say Republican, conservatives are typically strong individual people who are self-sufficient.
mhm.
They can't get that vote because they understand I can take care of myself. I don't need you to mother me. I don't
Yeah,
need you to tell me what I need. I don't need you to tell me what you're going to spend my money on. I'm going to do it because I'm strong. And that, I think, is a definitive difference between the way Democrats look at their voter base compared to what a true conservative, not these rhinos in Congress, the way that they look at their constituents. Because if you respect the people you represent and you're fearful of them, then you're gonna approach them with a respectful manner. But if you think that you're the all elite, I know everything and I have all the money and the power, that's how Democrats look at their voters. They baby them like mothers and they say, give me the power and I'll make sure you're taken care of.
absolutely. That's exactly what they do, and they want people to be. I mean, that's how they can keep themselves in power and keep them getting significant votes, is because they promise you everything, and then they keep you just poor enough to where you're still wishing, you're still hoping, and they'll keep telling you, "We'll get it, we'll get it. It's just those other guys. It's just those other guys." That's the reason why you're not getting millions of dollars from the government. That's the reason why you're not doing well. It's because of the other guys. It's not because our policy in and of itself is bad. And you've had 4 years where you controlled pretty much all of government except for the Supreme Court. Like, okay, we can claim the last two technically Republicans had control, but barely, barely. So no, it's crazy to me, and everything with the populism with Nancy Pelosi, all of it. But I want to hear a little bit more, to switch topics. I do want to hear more, Fabian, about the diversity, equity, and inclusion space thing you went to. But real quick, I am going to give a shout out to Freedom 2.0. Here is that. That's Freedom 2.0. We always talk about them on our shows. I got 2 bottles right here. I've been finishing them off. I got Vote for Freedom 2.0. It's basically like voting for conservatism for populism, but Water for Deplorables, which is also like Populist. So, yes, we got Freedom 2.0, everybody. You got to go check them out. Use code. We're still code. You can use freedom20.com/USA or use code breakaway at checkout for 15% off. And it's great because they don't use fluoride in their water. It's not going to make you gay. They use this like reverse osmosis thing, whatever the hell that means, and it makes it taste pretty damn good. And even along with that, they have a great community online where you can go check it out and like comment with other Freedom 2.0 people and the influencers that they got. They're people that are much more important and famous than me. You can go connect with them and comment on their stuff, and they'll comment back to you through the water cooler. It's great. So check out Freedom 2.0. I got to get myself another case of it here soon.
Yeah, I ran out of mine.
Well, it's just because it's so good. But let's get into this next story here, because who hates freedom? Apparently, it's space travelers. Because we got what I would call the Star Wars of of California that you were in. Tell us about what you were actually at in this forum that you went to.
Okay, so every year I go to something called the Space Tech Expo, and what it is, it's an industry convention of people who are in the aerospace industry and who are building things. It's actually really incredible because it's not like a lot of gimmicky stuff or like, hey, I like pictures of astronauts. These are the people who are actually creating the metals, the alloys, the 3D printing stuff, the oils, the things that we use to go to space. So it's more of a B2B. Like I work for a launch provider, and I go there and I can see people who are creating items that I would need to actually physically launch my satellite, or how to train my employees and things like that, how to create radiation hardened hardware. It's actually really incredible. So I go every year. Well, this year it was a lot bigger than it usually is.
Interesting.
And I saw a lot of young people there. And I'm like, okay, this is cool because these people are getting into the space innovation. And I always go hear the speakers because they have really good panels. And I want to share this. I have actually the digital format of the Space Tech Expo guide, just so I can show you guys what it looks like here. So this is the digital guide, and I want to focus on this is the conference that I meant to go to. Which is this is plugged in. So the conference that I meant, sorry, not the conference, but the speaking engagement that I meant to go to is called Using Rapid Collaborative Visualization to Convert Concepts to Capabilities in Innovation Ecosystems. That sounded really, really intriguing. Instead, I didn't go to the technology one. I went to the industry one. It's all in the same hall.
Yeah.
This one was Inclusive Orbits, Nurturing Diversity for a Sustainable Tech Future.
Oh, that makes sense.
And I didn't realize it. And I'm sitting there all excited. And then I hear just the most woke DEI language, equity, inclusion, everything being spoken up on stage. And I immediately just got mad. Like I got frustrated that I was hearing these people talk to these other people about what it means to be diverse. And I told, I was my little brother. And I said, I want to stand up and just be like, just start screaming at him, like asking him questions. But I was cordial. So there's this anonymous question that you can ask. There's an app that you can go and ask questions. And I wanted to make it so that they would actually answer my question. If I made it too obvious that I don't agree with them, they weren't going to read my question. So my question was, in space, the margin of error for disaster is extremely slim. How does one hire based on skin color rather than merit while keeping space safe? How do you hire based off skin color instead of merit when anything that goes wrong, there are millions of parts on a rocket. If anything goes wrong, the entire thing explodes and everyone dies. And if you're hiring, I mean, we see what happens with Boeing, or what's been happening with Boeing. There's doors flying off. There's landing gear mishaps. There's crash landings. What would that happen in space? I mean,
yeah.
So it was just really interesting, and I was really, really mad because Space is not a place that should be woke. That whole industry is just people doing things with numbers and physics and math. But for them to go install their DEI experts, it made me really sad and really mad at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really a fascinating thing that's happening even at the space level. I mean, we've obviously heard a lot of news recently about how we're hiring pilots and people for different aviation positions and that needs to be all diverse and everything. But even at the space front, what do you think of the fact that we have people that are responsible for the safety and lives of other people through their knowledge of science, math, technology, aviation, flight, landing? We have people that are not being hired based on the fact that they know their stuff. They're the best ones at it. We're having them hired because they might be the best of a certain racial group, or they might be the most available of a certain racial group, or they like to have sex with people that that are of the same gender as them, or they're gender non-conforming and they chop their dick off. I don't know. Like, what does that say to you when we have people that are responsible for other people?
You know, it tells me that they're focusing on the end result of a child that wasn't raised correctly at home. Instead of focusing on, hey, parents, make your kid or raise your kid better, and force them to actually learn and pay attention to what they're telling you and be a good mother and try to have your father, or, if you're a father, be a good father, but try to have them both in the home. And then you might raise a good kid that does really well in school. Instead, they're skipping that part because they need the vote from that, Black American or Hispanic American or whatever. Instead of saying, no, it's none of that fault. Let's just hire the people just based off their skin color and then figure it out later. I mean, yeah, okay, granted, if you're working at let's just say at a fast food restaurant or, some menial job, maybe. But when you're working on things that are really, really important that you can't mess up, not even once because people die, that's when that entire mother-son relationship I was talking about with, that the Democrats have with their voters, that's when it gets really dangerous because you're not focusing on the problem. You're skipping all that because you need that person's vote. So you're not going to talk to a single mother and say, hey, whip yourself into shape, go find a husband or raise your kid better, stop doing crack cocaine, whatever it is that, that they do. And instead they focus on just hiring them just because of their skin color.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's really fascinating to me. And so I didn't even know this, but so one of your jobs you said is about space and shooting satellites. And tell me a little bit more about that. Whatever you're allowed to tell me about.
No, one of my jobs. No. My job is not that. I just love space.
You just love it. You
I just love space. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay. I think you're talking about Bank X. Yeah. So
yes.
one one of the goals of Bank X is to launch small sats up into space. So
Gotcha.
small sats are satellites that are just, really this big. You don't need these massive bus-sized satellites, unless it's something you're going to put way out in orbit. Most stuff is low Earth orbit, LEO, and it's literally about that big. And you don't even have to have a whole rocket to launch your satellite. You can do what's called payload sharing. So SpaceX has a rocket. At the very top of the rocket, you have a satellite. Well, if you're paying $60 million for a launch, and you're like, Elon, I don't need all that room. My satellite's only half as big as your payload bay. He can say, okay, do other companies want to do a payload sharing? So we're going to go over here. And if your satellite is going to be in this area, let us know, and you can pay a small fraction of the fee for the whole 60 million Falcon 9, and we can get your stuff into space. So you say, hey, Elon, I need to go to this orbit, or I need to go to this inclination. And he say, okay, well, next year we have a launch coming out. You can pay a fraction of what it costs to make the entire rocket, and we'll get you in the area. So anyway, that's how small sats are revolutionizing space. So BankX in the roadmap, one of the things is to create a internet-less internet where you're always connected but never plugged in. So it essentially is, imagine Starlink that's completely decentralized, unhackable. That's what BankX is aiming to do. So that's my involvement with that.
Interesting. Well, I wanted to get the idea from somebody who's really into space, like an autistic kid is into trains. I would like to get your.
I just saw that video, that YouTube guy, by the way, the other day.
And so I wanted to get your opinion though. For this next thing, I'm going to have us react to just to talk about, because I saw it in the news earlier today. But to react to this thing, I might be violating copyright a little bit, and YouTube won't give us a strike. They'll just give us like a warning, but I got to take my Facebook off. So if you're watching now or later on Facebook, go watch this entire video on YouTube. I'm taking off the Facebook now. Thank you for watching. Check out Speechless with Kev or Breakaway USA on YouTube, Twitter, anywhere else, and you can find the rest of this video. So let's get my Facebook off, remove this. Okay, save changes. My Facebook is now gone. Okay, so there's this movie that's coming out, and I want your reaction to the trailer. This has Scarlett Johansson and Channing Tatum in it, and the trailer was just dropped like today. I'm not even going to tell you anything about it besides the fact that it has to do with space. Oh, my site's muted. Give me one moment to unmute. Here we go.
Hey, Joe. Evening, Cole. Miss, you're on fire.
Very original. No, I do not want to stop, drop, and roll with you.
No, your book is on fire.
Oh my God.
Alcohol and flames, they like each other. Cold dating.
Kelly Jones.
Public support for the moon mission is rock bottom.
Every day, something is breaking. And we're dead. Again. We're blowing up.
The space program is a bloated mess.
NASA needs a marketing specialist, and you are the very best.
Excuse me? What are you doing here?
I tracked you down because I felt we had a connection.
What?
I'm joking. I work here now to sell the moon.
NASA's not something that you sell with a jingle and a slogan.
When I'm done, those men are going to be bigger than the Beatles.
Who is that?
For me, this is very personal.
He's got my name.
You told me that your guys don't do interviews, so I had to hire new guys.
I'm here for the casting. Who's he?
You're a juicy part.
60 missions in Korea.
I flew 52 missions in Korea.
I flew 52 missions in Korea. How's that?
What?
The whole world will be watching. We can't afford to lose to the Russians. We need to shoot the backup version of the moon landing.
You mean to fake it? No one can ever know what we're doing.
I cannot accept that.
They will shoot you.
What is my budget?
Oh, boy.
I know a lot more about the moon than I know about you.
Give me go, no go for launch. If you fake this mission, every single thing that we have sacrificed will have been for nothing.
You know you couldn't have made it to the sea without me.
4, 3, 2.
1. And
My Armstrong is a whiny little bitch. We have to recast.
I think we should have gotten Kubrick.
So they're
That
making
looks really good.
an entire movie that is fiction about faking the moon landing. What are your thoughts? Do you believe the moon landing was faked? What do you think about this movie coming out? Everything like that.
Yeah, so this is something people that in the space community kind of always kind of knew. They did do that. They couldn't fail. I mean, you had the Cold War going on. You had Russia, the USSR versus the USA. I mean, exactly what you said. There's no way that, or whoever said in the trailer, there's no way that we're not going to make it, whether real or fake. So here's the thing: is Russia. Well, let me go back. At the time, the U.S. was spending 4% of their GDP on the space race. 4%, which is a gigantic amount. Now I think it's like 0.04, and we're still doing the stuff we're able to do. It employed hundreds of thousands of people from across all states because you didn't have, CAD computer software. You had you would make it and test it. So it was a lot of repetition, a lot of manual labor, a lot of mathematics that had to be invented for this stuff. The simple fact of us being able to get off the Earth is pretty incredible. And we didn't know, I mean, the Earth's atmosphere is actually pretty thick. So this Russian guy named Soyolsky actually developed something called the rocket equation, which is how we know, like, oh, okay, that's how much force we need to get off the Earth. The Russians wanted nothing better to win. They had won at launching the first satellite, the first man in space, the first probe, on the moon. And I believe they had the first probe on Mars as well, if I'm not mistaken. I know we had the Viking, I think the Viking 1. Anyway, they wanted nothing more for this thing to fail. And had they gotten any whiff that it didn't really happen, they would have been the first ones on the horn because they were ready to go. Now, I do believe 100% that they had this all created so that in the event that they failed or that they crash landed and there was no, there was still the spacecraft on the moon. It was just everybody was dead.
Yeah.
And then, I believe they all had that happen, or rather, so they had the movie created in the eventuality that that did happen. So that's my take on it.
No, absolutely. And even along with that, just because I've been a person where I'm like, I'm never 100%, like I cannot come on here and say 100% the moon landing was fake. Like I'll never truly know that. And I'm the kind of person where I'm like, I need undeniable proof to be able to come up to you and say, this is truly what I believe. And I'm not 100% convinced, but I even had, along with all the socio-political reasonings at the time, you think about the plausibility period. A lot of people claim that Stanley Kubrick was the one to produce, and that's why there was that little joke there that Stanley Kubrick produced the moon landing. Well, there's two pieces of evidence that I find very important to talk about with this, and it's just because I've nerded out on this before. If you look here, this is 2001: A Space Odyssey. This was the movie that Stanley Kubrick made, one of his most famous, which obviously covers, if anybody's seen it, it covers a vast amount of time frames, but a lot of it also takes place in space, being science fiction and using crazy technology for amazing visuals that was absolutely revolutionary for film at the time. At the time, this was 1968. The actual moon landing, which was for grainy televisions, 1969. Like, we absolutely had the technology to do this, and Stanley Kubrick had shown that he could do space film before this and make it look realistic and believable to a general audience with a lot more than what they needed him for it to air on grainy televisions. Along with that, if you look at one of Stanley Kubrick's most famous films, which came out in the 1970s, which The Shining, which was based off of Stephen King's novel of the same name, you look at Danny Torrance, who is one of the main characters, the little kid in that movie, when he is riding his tricycle down a hallway. Let me share my screen here. He wears what sweater? This movie being directed by Stanley Kubrick. You see that sweater there? You see what it says on it?
Oh yeah, Apollo 11.
Apollo 11 USA. Many people consider this to be Stanley Kubrick's admission that he faked the moon landing, which I just have always found absolutely fascinating. Yes, the moon landing. I don't know. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. But it absolutely could have been faked, and not only with all the socio-political and all the space side of stuff that you know, but it makes sense here. But do you think that since then we have been to the moon, even whether or not we faked it back then? Do you think?
Well, there's currently an Indian lander on the moon. It didn't really make it. A Chinese lander on the moon. That's on the dark side of the moon. We have the LRO, which is called the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, orbiting the moon. And we have India's version of the LRO that is orbiting the moon, both of which have taken actual pictures of the actual landing site. The reason you couldn't do it from the Earth is because, I mean, those landers are tiny. They're only like, 8 feet or something like that. And you can't get the pixelation from a camera because of the atmosphere and things like that on the moon. But when you have a satellite orbiting the moon, there's nothing in between. There's no atmosphere. It's just the moon. And you're really, really close. So we have pictures from that. Now, somebody can say, well, those pictures are falsified. Okay. So India and the US are both falsifying pictures for no apparent reason. And, all that. So you can always say, well, it's not real because they're making everything up. But it's like, okay, so every country is in on it now. And the 100,000s of people that worked in the space agency and developed actual physics that work and that we still use the mathematics for to launch, all those people were lying. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people were doing menial jobs for no reason. It was all fake. All these tests that they did, all the rocket launches. And, here's the other thing is we didn't just go to the moon once, right? We went, I believe, 8 times. So 16 people have been on the moon. Before that, you had other rockets, you had other missions, not just Apollo, that actually proved that you can be in space and flip around, because I don't want to get too deep into in the details, but it was a 5-stage rocket essentially that made it to the moon. which is extremely complicated, but they had to prove all these things in space. It's not just one day where we're like, hey, we're going to go to space. No, we went multiple times out into space, and we did all these EVAs, and we did all these things. And then they had to go to the moon and not land many times. And then they had to go and orbit the moon a few times to prove that they can actually orbit the moon and then come back. Then they finally launched the guys that were going to land on it. So there was this whole thing that happened before that. People were dying. It was this big thing. A lot of people don't know that. And they say, okay, because one day we just went to the moon and we built this rocket, and then boom, and then it went. No, I mean, the development of the F1 engines which was the engine that they used to go to the moon. Just that is incredible. The story, how they got they got the original schematics from the V2 rocket in the Germans, and then they created this massive thing, and then they proved it. There's these test stands. You got to build a test stand to build it to test the actual rocket to make sure that it's actually working. That they had hypergolic fuels back then, I believe. No, they use RP1 and oxygen. Like, there's just so much science that went into this thing. So the more you know about it, could it have been faked? Yeah, I mean, there's a non-zero possibility that it could have been faked. Why would Russia not say anything? Why would no one say, hey, guys, this didn't really happen? All this work I was doing was for no reason. Why would India then, now, just in today's day, I think they released another video or another picture a few days ago, have orbiting satellites and say, oh, cool, yeah, we see it. It's right there. Hey, everyone, this is the same thing. Same picture that the American satellite took.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. One thing I wanted to ask you about too, and this is maybe, I know that originally we were supposed to have debate night tonight, which I prefaced before in all of this, and we're going to figure that out exactly how we're going to do it. I think we should just honestly rip it one night, where we just come on, because we've been having a damn good conversation going back and forth. None of this was planned. I did not plan. All I planned for tonight was to react to that video that I had at the very beginning. That's all that was planned for this live stream. And then we've kind of just been riffing on a lot of different things that's been going on. But I this could be a debate topic for us, is what do you have to say to flat earth people? Because again, you're such a space guy, and so much of what they argue is like, okay, the moon landing was faked, and the pictures of the earth are all AI, or not AI, but like Photoshop generated using drastic amounts of technology. The earth is actually flat, and the government is hiding it from us, all these things. What do you have to say to them?
So what's interesting is I actually interviewed the head of the Southern California Flat Earth Society.
Oh,
his name's Dan the Waterman. That's what he calls himself. And I watched a lot of flat Earth interviews and flat Earth stuff before that.
mm-hmm.
And I wanted to take it. And a lot of the guys that interview flat earthers, they interview them, and they just kind of they basically talk to them the way Nancy Pelosi talks to her voters, right?
Like demeaning.
Very demeaning.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I don't want to do that. I actually want to know what these people think. So using my knowledge, I would just ask him questions. Okay, tell me what this is. And he would give an answer, and then I would respond to the answer with another question. But it was really difficult to interview him, because if someone says, Kevin, gravity is not real, what do you ask them to basically say, well, why is it real, or why is it not real? You have to go deeper. And that's what I found really hard, because in real time, I'm taking these crazy statements that I've never heard anyone really tell me before. I'm like, what in the hell? And then he's like, what do you think about it? And it's like in real time. So it was really interesting.
Well, and that's what, imagine though, the thing is okay, so to us, that sounds crazy. To most average people, somebody coming and saying to you, gravity isn't real, sounds crazy. And it's like, how do I even rebut that? Because it's such it's so out of the realm of reality. Like, that's how it feels to most people. And I believe gravity is real. I'm not saying that, but then imagine sitting in a very similar situation are leftists on college campuses. And so when somebody says there are only two genders, they are in that same mindset as us when we hear somebody say gravity isn't real, because to them, they have been surrounded in this bubble of there are more than two genders and we need to be inclusive and blah, blah, blah. And then anybody who doesn't agree with this, which there's not that many that believe that there's more than, or there's only two genders. Like, that's what they get told. So there's not that many of them. And so then their mind just gets blown when there's like three scrawny white kids on their campus that are like, hey, yo, there's only two genders. And they lose their minds. They can't comprehend it. And I just wanted to make the analogy because it's been so weird to me when I'm like, you don't understand that there's people that disagree with you, like to these leftists, but that's where they're at because they're in a similar mind fog as the general populace believing that gravity exists.
And you know what I found out to be the best way to not only disprove or just to make their argument seem so ridiculous. It's a very easy thing, and I did it the entire time. It's called the Socratic method. So he said gravity is not real. I said, interesting. How so? Now his job is to disprove that gravity is real, because making a statement that it's not real, why should I be on the defensive to defend what we live in every single day, that we have mathematics to prove, that people have won Nobel Prizes on? Why am I immediately going to take that as a fact and start defending it? No. Because then I'm trying to convince the person. The person has to convince me. So I said, interesting. How so? And then the entire argument just turned into, well, we went to Long Beach and we shined a laser at Catalina Island and our measurements. And I said, okay, but how does that prove that there's no gravity?
Exactly.
That the Earth is flat. So once you start questioning them, you quickly realize that they all have the same surface level answers about why. But then when you ask them a question on why is that correct, or how do you know that is correct, they have no answer for that. Zero answer. Another easy question. I said, okay, so the Earth is flat. Why is every other planet a sphere? Like, what happened there? Are we that special? I asked him, how does GPS work if we don't have satellites orbiting? And I asked him, said, do you know how GPS works? Nope. Okay, well then, if you don't even know how it works, I can't explain to you why it's right. You have to explain to me why something you don't understand is wrong before I will tell you, or even acknowledge your statement as being anywhere near true if you can't prove that it's not true. So this is the way you get around flat earthers. Last thing about them is they are not a cohesive group of people. They believe many different things. And one of the things that happened was there's the Flat Earth Society, and you have like the other organization. He was saying that the other organization is a psyop meant to make flat earthers look stupid. He goes, we don't believe that. I said, are you saying, okay, so there's no cohesiveness? So I dropped the interview in the biggest flat earth Discord group in the world. And I said, guys, what do you think about this? Well, they came after him. He said, no, he's wrong. What he believes is psyop is the opposite. I said, well, this is crazy. There is no cohesiveness, and no one believes the same thing.
But that's because they are all nut jobs. Like, to some extent, like, I'm sure some of them are nice people. Actually, I know for a fact some of them are nice people, because I had a very, very long conversation with the flat earther last summer in central Illinois. And she's like a very nice person, the thing is people always like frame it as if a flat earther is like this tinfoil hat living out in Yellowstone in their RV, broadcasting on a CB radio, telling everybody the end is nigh and all that kind of crap. And that's not the way it is. Like, the lady I had a conversation with, like, man, I love her to death as a person, and like, you would never know she's a flat earther until you get her on that subject. But like, she's a normal mom, like soccer mom, like has a very normal family, life, husband. They're average Trump supporting conservative people. But then as soon as you're like, hey, yo, I'm going to take a trip across the globe, they're like, oh, no, my God, that's not how it is. It's not how it is. And they're just like, they go crazy. And so I had a long conversation with her, like you said, like having a serious conversation. And I would be like, but like, let's talk about, like, okay, but what about all of this facts, data, and logic that show you're wrong? And then I even went to like religious point of view. There's religious arguments for, because a lot of times some flat earthers try to make a religious argument. Well, God created the earth is flat and that's the way it is. But there actually is religious argument to show that it would be a globe. And so I started talking to her a little bit about that and pulling up, Googling shit, like an average backyard barbecue conversation that just gets a little too heated. And then at the end of it all, I was like, there is no convincing this lady. Like, it does not matter. She's so deep in her conviction. That's how so many of these people are. And I come down to the question that I think is the the primavera of the entire thing. It is the most important thing. And it's my question of why does it matter? That's my question to every single flat earther. Why does it matter?
I have the perfect answer for you.
I want to know your answer because I have my own, but I'm curious what you think.
Within the first 5 minutes, I got the answer out of Dan the Waterman, and it really struck me. I did not expect to hear this. So he's saying all this stuff, right? And we're talking about his upbringing, and I could tell what kind of guy. He was like a dork, didn't have a lot of friends, kind of outcast. And I said, do you think that because you think that life did you dirty, that you're trying to prove that you're trying to prove yourself right and prove everything that you feel was like anti-you wrong? And he said, I'll never forget, he said, even more than that. He goes, you'll see me trying to fix problems because I never fixed the problems in my life. This is in the first 5 minutes, Kevin.
Yeah.
And I was like, now I get it. These flat earthers are, for the most part, people that feel like outcasts, that, the world is against them. And if they can somehow prove that the world is wrong, not them, and that they're right, they get some kind of vindication out of it. And then they have this group of them.
But again, that does not ultimately prove the point. That's not like that. Why does it matter? It's not because it's not for some altruistic reason or proof of I don't know, my religion or proof of all these other things. Like this is actually the meaning of life, or it doesn't even solve it doesn't solve world hunger. Like that was my whole thing with this lady. And I think that's a very interesting point there. And I think for a lot of people that could be true. But in my conversation, I would because she has a great life. Like she could go about and it would never mean anything. However, we have so many more pressing issues that, in my opinion, matter. Like people coming after our children, whether that's through radical gender ideology or through some level of pedophilia and normalizing it. We have issues. I mean, even if you're a leftist, we have the idea of climate change or something that's existential, right? Like there are so many other things that are on our plate. We have illegal immigrants crossing our border. We have inflation that's making it hard for so many people to live. Why is your issue? Why is the hill you're willing to die on that you believe that the earth is flat? And so I asked her that question and she goes, well, and this is what she says. And I got really mad at it. This is like the point where I got really mad in the conversation because I asked and she goes, it matters because if they're lying about the basic fundamental truth of what shape our globe is, well, not that. That's not how she said it. She said what shape the earth is, whether it's flat or a globe, then what else could they be lying about? And I got so mad at her because I was like, we know they lie to us. I don't need to prove that the earth is flat to know this. Like in CIA documents, we know that JFK was killed. We know that they knew Russia didn't steal the 2016 election. Like we know that they had intelligence about 9/11 before 9/11. Like we know in so many ways that the government lies to us. I don't need the proof as to whether or not the earth is flat for that. And so it made me so mad that was her reasoning.
It reminds me of this meme I saw the other day, and it says, people who call other people conspiracy theorists, do they literally believe that the government does not lie, like ever? Because if you're calling someone conspiracy theorists, they say, no, you're wrong. They're not doing that. Like, how could you even say that? How could you say the government is not doing this? You're wrong when you have zero idea. Just like, Dan the Waterman, who has zero idea about how gravity works, but he's making this bold statement that it's wrong when he can't explain how it even works. That's like someone saying, Kevin, you're a conspiracy theorist because you think the CIA killed JFK. I know they didn't because what? Because what? Because I trust the government? Like that's zero proof. So that's the same argument that flat earthers make.
Yeah, exactly. And we know our government lies to us. They've done it and they've admitted to doing it. I don't need the flat earth thing to tell me. But I also think when it comes to the conspiracy theorist label, this is just a little point that I have, is I've always liked to call myself a skeptic. I'm a reasonable skeptic of just about anything. Like I said earlier, and like for most things, even I consider myself a Catholic. To me, it's the most plausible religion and makes the most sense. But I'm still not always 100% convinced. I ask my priest questions fairly often whenever I get a chance to. I ask him questions. I ask other Catholics questions. It's because I'm trying to seek answers. I'm a skeptic. What happened is we had conspiracy theorists, which were those people living out in Yellowstone on their CB radios with the tinfoil hats. We had them. They were the conspiracy theorists. They were the ones that bought into every level of skepticism, but bought into it saying, I believe this 100%. And then we had skeptics, and the left labeled skeptics like myself as conspiracy theorists, the people that said, hey, maybe this vaccine isn't so safe. I don't know exactly what is wrong with it, but maybe there's some issues there. Let's check that out. All this other
How
stuff.
dare you question the government, Kevin? The government has their best interest, your best interest in mind. I know because, well, I just know. So take your vaccine.
Absolutely. And so that's my point. And we could go on hours and hours and hours to talk about skepticism, conspiracy theories, multiple, whether it's flat earth or the moon landing, everything like that. I've had a lot of fun talking with you, Fabian, and we went even longer than I anticipated, talking about a lot of random things, but keep making sure everybody, if you're watching right now, make sure you tune in to Breakaway USA, my channel, Speechless with Kev, any of our things, Breakaway_USA. You can find all of our stuff. And we're going to be on having some form of content, basically 7 days a week. Next Tuesday, we're going to bring you a debate or maybe just some kind of a conversation, something. We're going to keep bringing you guys content every night of the week. You don't want to miss it. Any last words, Fabian?
We got to continue this conversation because I love talking about this stuff.
We do. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, everybody, this has been an interesting Tuesday special of Speechless through Breakaway USA. God bless you. God bless America. And thank you for watching Speechless.